Sid Mark was there, Dean, and he said, can you imagine, he said, I appreciate the award. He said, if I had picked Jerry Vale, I'd be home watching the Newlander trial right now. That was a great line, Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at some fantastic disc jockeys. You're looking at the WIP crowd, the Metro Mediocres. And that's what they were called. That's what our baseball team was called, the softball team, Metro Mediocres. And Dean Tyler was the guy who really started it all and helped us. Harvey Glasscock was the guy, I think, who really began everything. And, you know, with a name like Glasscock, you've got to be real good. You do realize that. He's like that strawberry jam. And Harvey Glasscock was sensational. Dave Croninger came along after him. And I'll just give you, very briefly, and then introduce the crowd, some of the names that were given to me. And Bob Russo helped me out on some of these great names, fellows who aren't with us anymore. How about Joe McCauley? Yeah. Chuck Doherty, Chucky from Kentucky. I replaced him, by the way, 10-1. Ken Garland, of course, he was on 1-4 at this time. Tom Brown, Bill Hickok, and Jim Tate was doing the all-night show. Do those names strike a note with you? I certainly hope they do, because they were the ones who kicked this off. And I'll introduce Dean. Kelly really was the general manager, but he closed his door after lunch, and no one was allowed inside, and he really gave Dean carte blanche. So Dean was selected in the 70s as the program director of the decade by Billboard magazine. So those are the kind of people that you're dealing with. And here is Dean Tyler to reminisce just a little bit about WIP.
Thank you, Bill. I don't always sound like this. I'm getting a case of laryngitis because WPN had me in to record some liners for him today, and I've got some sort of an allergy condition, and it went right to my throat, so I apologize. Yeah, radio, not TV. Well, what do you know? I had to talk him into getting into television. He was afraid he'd lose his job if he went to TV. Remember that?
Was.
Yeah.
He was nice enough. What happened? Tom Lemaine asked Dean if he could sneak out to do the weather forecast, right, Tom? Tell the truth now.
You didn't go. Just give us a mention now and then, you know, and we let him go. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dick Carr, who was the general manager that hired me there, so obviously he was a giant. And I was really hired not to run the radio station, but because I played softball. At that time, the first thing I was asked by the sales manager was, what position do you play? Thank God I said the position that he didn't play. And he said, okay, you're hired. And the rest is history. I mean, there were so many stories that we just were kicking around here a little bit ago that are unreal, like Tom Moran, who was on the air, and I had to listen to him and monitor him every day because he was such a bad boy. Oh. And so, yes, I'm driving home from the station in the car with my late wife, and he said a phrase on the air pertaining to Gilbert O'Sullivan, the Irish singer who had had a couple of hits. And she said, you know what that means? And I said, no, why?
The phrase was tug on my home.
Kiss my ass is what it meant. So I pulled over to the first bar I could find, ordered a Jack Daniels, and then called him. I said, Tom, what the hell are you doing? He said, well, first of all, he always answers the phone in a voice, because anybody who knows Tom knows he does a lot of voices. And I think you were Jacques Cousteau, one of those guys. And I said, Tom, shape up here, damn it. What did you just say on the air? What did I say? Tug 'em home. Yeah. Do you know what it means? I said, yes. Uh-oh.
Well, I always claimed that tug 'em home was a Gaelic phrase taught to me by my dad that meant take a bath, because we had Irish Spring deodorant. So tug 'em home was take a bath in Gaelic. And every time that spot turned up, it was tug 'em home, baby.
The only thing I will say about Nat Wright is that for a guy that worked the toughest shift in radio, because I had it in my very first job at WIBG, was the all-night show. And there was one thing you could always depend on. Nat was going to be there, and he was going to be right every night. And that's not a rhyme, that's just the truth.
Hey, let me sleep under the console.
Yeah, right, exactly.
While I was on the air, by the way.
And Tom Moran would always say, and he said it many times on the air, he said, I just upped my contribution to United Fund, up yours.
Well, we had a bowling team. Dean Everett, the sportsman, got us all into a bowling league. Remember that? Up at Adams Lane, up near.
That was the
old
team without the ringers.
We had, our team name was, and we played middle of the road music, but our name was the Rolling Stones, if you remember. That's because Tom Kennedy got us a deal on freebie shirts. So anytime we had a game, was like every Tuesday night, I would report the next day on what our team did, and the phrase was, our team, as a team, we have upped our average, so up yours at home. One of those things. Not too many people heard that. With the exception of your own self.
Except myself, I heard it all. The thing I would say about the WIP was, not unlike WPPN, was that whatever we did, the audience was fully aware of it, and they supported it all, and we were a family. We genuinely were. And Bill mentions guys like Jim Tate and our predecessors. I was at Wibbage when I first came to Philadelphia, and when I was going to my record hops, a lot of hops. When I did the record hops, I would drive to and from listening to whoever was on the air at WIP because they were that talented. I mean, heavy hitters.
They were. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dick Clayton, who's unfortunately is no longer with us, and Ken Garland, our morning man. So we did this by being on the air. So you heard from Moran and you heard from the boss. The tall guy in the middle started out doing 8 to midnight. He was in the Air Force. Navy, but involved with flying. Was involved with meteorology, or at least always loved meteorology. Did you not, Tom?
If you're going to be a pilot, you have to know what the hell the weather is. You know what I mean? The Navy drilled it into me. I had a Marine Corps drill sergeant says you're going to be a pilot, you're going to learn how the atmosphere works, and you're going to learn how the Marines do it. And they just had a way about it. They just figured the way you're going to get this college graduate ship shape and ready to go into flight school is to have a Marine drill instructor teach them how to do it. But that's true. The first time I did weather on Channel 3, I was doing sports, and I did the 6 o'clock sports that night. It was during Hurricane David, and they sent Joe Whitty down to Miami to cover the hurricane. And in their infinite wisdom, they realized they didn't have a weather presence for the 11 o'clock news. And the weather was the big story because the hurricane coming up the coast. So I'm in the news sports department. I'm banging out the rundown for the 11 o'clock sports. And the news director comes in and says, I want to talk to you. Well, when they say that, you know, okay, let me see. I got my bag ready. We would like you to do the weather at 11. Yeah, sure, right. Sure. What makes you think I can do the weather? They said, well, you're a Navy pilot. You must know something about it. I said, that's all military. You'll be fine. So I said, well, the onus is on you. And Joe Whitty did his own forecasting. We did not have AccuWeather. We did not have a weather service. Joe did his own forecasting. And the news director brought me into the weather office and showed me all these charts and everything. And some of them were familiar and some of them weren't. And I did the weather that night. And I think that's the only time anybody has ever done the sports at 6 and the weather at 11. I have that tape. That's how desperate times work. And that's how that progressed. I never really pitched for the weather job. I came into this town really as, you know, air personality on WIP. But my first year in, I had to ask the general manager for 60 days off because the 76ers asked me to do their games on television. Now, you're only in Philadelphia 1 year, and I'm working for the station that everybody wanted to work for, the whole country, really. And I said, there's no way. If the general manager says no, that's fine. Thanks for asking. No problem whatsoever. They check with Dean, work out the schedule, tell him how many days you're going to be off, and we'll be fine. I said, I'm going to be off 60 days. And these are away games, because Prism was doing home games. I mean, I would take the red eye from Seattle or LA or Portland, get back in time to go on the air. Tom was lots of times waiting breathlessly to make sure I would make it. And try that this day and age. And at the time I had also was the Sixers. I was doing Sixers, Channel 3 Sports, and WIP. And WIP never got in the way of anything that I had to do. it was close. I would get off the air at 10:55. Sometimes I'd record the last 2 records, which he never knew. That's up to them. And I would leave WIP at 19th and Walnut and go to Channel 3 at 5th and Market and be on the air for the 11 o'clock sports. And I did that for a long time and never missed a beat. Now, there was also a case where I was doing Flyers highlights on Channel 29 and doing sports on Channel 3 at the same time. Fortunately, Channel 29 and Channel 23 are half a block away. I did 2 live sports shows on 2 different television stations in the same half hour. Do you think anybody would allow you to do that today? No, but those, and you know, the thing was, WIP was above all of that. They didn't care whether you cross-promoted some other. As a matter of fact, the first couple of years I did the Sixers games, I was still doing 8 to midnight on WIP, and the Sixer games were simulcast on 1210, which means I was on opposite myself. Really. Somebody was filling in for me from 8 to 11 while I was doing Sixers basketball on another station from 8 to 11. Think that would happen today? Yeah, because all stations are owned by one guy. But I mean,
Well, you're on 57 and you're also on Channel 3.
well, because we own all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, it's just...
Actually, Tom, I can tell you why you got away with all that. You hear what Bill said earlier about Don Kelly's store being locked in the afternoon?
Yeah.
I had access. I knew when to catch him. I didn't say yes to anything.
After 3 martinis, we had a
Well,
party.
whatever it took to make it work, Dean, thank you.
Another gentleman in the building, Bob Charger, who worked with WIP, happy to have him with us. Some newsmen of note, unfortunately, they're not with us anymore. Gordon Thomas, John Paul Weber. Actually, I am John Paul Weber's illegitimate son through Sally Starr. I don't know if you know that. But,
Bill, can I digress a minute?
go right ahead.
In honor of the late, great Dick Clayton.
All right.
Oh, yes, see it coming.
A reading. If you'll join us this afternoon, this reading comes from the Eastern Delaware County. And the reading today comes from page 617. Romus, Frank, Roland, Brandon, Rolando, Michael. He would do this ad infinitum.
Yes.
And get to the bottom of the line, and he wouldn't halfway between the R's, and he said.
What the hell did he say? I have no idea.
How did he finish?
No, the one that I liked was when he got to, he turned the page, what I thought it was, and the name was Green. And he started reading the names of Green, you know, Arnold Green, Bobby Green, Ethel Green, E. Green, E. Green, E. Green, E. Green, L. Green.
He also had an engineer named Walt Yost, and he had a program called Waltz Time. He would play a waltz, and then he would say, "It's waltz time." And he'd say, "Walt, what time is it?"
Half past.
Half past.
And you've been listening to Waltz Time.
That's it.
WIP.
Meanwhile, back in the telephone directory, Dick was up to like M. Green, Murray Green, Will Green, Nancy Green, Paul Green, Pat Green, P. Green.
That's how he ended it, right there. And that's our reading for today. Thank you.
By the way, I think...
Let me move over to the all-night show. Here's a man, as Dean mentioned, he was on the air from midnight to 6. He took, well, Joe McCauley, as you know, had that show at one time. Midnight to 6, and he was all alone. There wasn't a living soul in the building at 19th and Walnut Street in the Wellington building. That's not right. That's Nat Wright, the night rat.
Yes. By the way, that's strange. Okay. A microphone?
Right.
They never trusted me with this. That strange alliteration that Bill Weber just quoted followed me from 2 cities. It was created in Washington. And when I came up here to go with WIP in August of 1961, Bill, he was at WFIL radio at the time and also doing a breakfast time show on Channel 6. Somehow he let the word get out, so I've never been able to escape that. Actually, I was sort of a special teams player. When I came up here in the summer of '61, I spent my first 7 years in the course of a week, 3 days in the newsroom, And then the next 3 days were music, and every day was different. So I really slept on the installment plan. The advantage of that was my memos never caught up to me. That's why I stayed there almost 24 years. It was in the summer of 1967 when Jim Tate, a terrific talent, who did have an afternoon drive time show, went to NEW in New York, left and came back to do the all-night show, found that he could not sleep in the daytime. He was looking cadaverous. So Dick Carr asked me if I would do it for a while. I said, all right, I wasn't that keen about that schedule again. But if they throw a little money on you, that will sort of placate any uncomfortable circumstances. I needed the daytime to be open because at that time I had a severely handicapped kid to take care of, and the company helped a lot in that respect. And when I came to WIP, they had just tried an abortive experiment with rock and roll. They were going to go get WIBG. And they had people like Joe McCauley, who was playing rock in the morning. They had guys like Marty O'Hara, Tom Brown, terrific guy who died a few years ago. Chuck Doherty and others. But to show you how the ratings turned out, after about the first 6 months, they found out that WIP playing rock and roll owed ARV 5 people. So then, and that's what I think is the most significant thing about WIP, I think they invented MOR in this market. They decided the rock people had decreed death after age, what, 40 at the latest, and people were living longer. And so what we did was to do everything that Frank and Steve and Edie were doing, anything that didn't rock among people who were known. And we have Anthony Newley singing Pump Goes the Weasel. That was on our playlist. You'd have loved that, Bruce. But they found this, they awakened, WIP's format then awakened this, what we thought was dead audience of mature listeners. They stayed with the fun of the games and the interaction. So in the summer of 1967, I started doing the all-night show. Joe McCauley had it during those great years when he was the home front morale officer during World War II and just afterward. I still catered, it was a lunch pail show, catered to the people at work. And I did do it a little more than just temporarily. I stayed with it almost 17 years. I just turned my life upside down. And the daytime was my nighttime. But I appreciated the break. I built up some seniorities that when the format switched to talk all night, the severance was something beautiful. And all the guys went to bat for me. The new Metro Media middle management wanted to try to weasel out of it, but
Weasel?
these guys...
Management weaseling?
Huh?
That's strange. Bones?
And also, when I was working all night, I was checking out news hits coming in and writing a few short news stories, and very simple, believe me, simple, declarative sentences to pass along to Dave Crane, Bill Payne, Gordon Thomas, and John Paul, and the others.
And we can't forget Del Dengate and Cash Call Tappan, the gal who did all our cash calls for us. And the guy who did the music is at the end of the line, Bob Russo, who was involved with all our music.
I'm probably, excuse the voice, I'm probably the luckiest man, paraphrasing Lou Gehrig, on the face of the earth. I have no talent compared to these guys. I just was at the right place at the right time. Late 60s, I remember sitting in the music library with Dave Herman, and we're sitting on the floor, and he's showing me albums that I've never saw before. He's telling me he's going to go on the air doing something called the Marconi Experiment. Wow. And WIP-FM is going to be MMR. And I was there at that time, sat there with them, listened to records, listened to Fireside Theater, Michael Tierson, is that who they were? And I said to Dave, you're going to play people that talk? You're not playing music? Well, he said, some of it's going to be talk, and some of it's going to be music, and some of it's going to be classical music. And I said, he's not going to be around here too much longer. I had my finger right on the pulse of that. But just lucky, there in the late 60s again, the Eagles came from WCAU to WIP for the first time. I was lucky enough to be become the producer of the Philadelphia Eagles, first producer IP ever had. Didn't know what a producer was in football. Found out, worked with Charlie Swift and Clarence Peaks the first year. But I think, and Al Pollard the second year was doing color, and Thatcher Longstreth was on the sidelines. But one last thing, let the guys who really have something to say talk. When I found out how great WIP was is when I left it. When I went to WIP in the late 60s, we had 67 people on staff, AM station, counting part-timers and everything. And then I was lucky enough to go to New York. I only worked 2 markets in my life, Philadelphia and New York. And I went to New York thinking, wow, the big time, I'm really going, this is going to be great. And I found out that I already was at the #1 station in the country. And when I got to New York, I was so shocked to hear how many other people knew it was the #1 station. They were all like in awe that I worked at WIP. And I thought it was going to be the other way around. So when everybody complains about radio today and what's going on and all that, I'm not one of them. Business is business. But they don't know what they missed. They just don't know.
Thank you.
We missed it. We did mention something about Ken Garland, and in the same tone of voice, the same line of thinking that Bob was talking about. The thing that made WIP, one of the things that made WIP successful, I think, was, aside from the bad experiment that Matt mentioned about playing rock and roll music, it was never the all-new WIP. WIP fused into what it eventually became and what it continued to be. Dean had a lot to do with that. When I was brought in, I came from a rock and roll station, and this WIP's intention at the time was to insert little bits of that pop rock music into other parts of the day, but not many of the guys at the station weren't familiar with that type of music, and Ken Garland was one of them. And Ken came from a big band era, and Ken would not accept this new pop music. And Dean was pulling his hair out about this whole thing and just could get nowhere with Ken. And Dean called me into his office one day and we're discussing this situation, and everybody else is into it. Tom's into it. Nat had no problem. Dick Clayton, for God's sakes, he was playing, Chuck Berry, for crying out loud. And, but Dean said, Whoopi was playing Charles Berry. But Dean said, Tom, I can't get anywhere with Ken, and it's the biggest show in the morning, but his music is so different from what we're doing the rest of the day, and he just comes from a different era. You go talk to him, he likes you. So I did want to go in and let Ken know that I was specifically in there to do this. We just sat around and chewed the fat for a while, and I said, Ken, you are so big in this town that no matter what you do and what you say, people are going to buy it. Okay, where are you coming from? And I said, well, there's some things we're doing here. We're introducing some other music during the time of the day that, we feel that we can infuse it in, not just scare people away. And the benefit of this was we had 2 generations of people listening to us. I had as many people come up to me today and say, I listened to you on WIP. I said, you were too young. My mother and father had it on, and I was listening at the same time. You don't. Everything's so pigeonholed today. But anyway, that's the success that happened. So I said, Ken, you ought to try some of this stuff. You could play something tomorrow. I don't care what it is. Your audience would love it because of your popularity. Well, where do I begin? It's just Motown. That's a good place to begin. Yeah, but how about My Girl by the Temptations? And that's it. Just try that and see how it works out. A couple of days later, Ken's playing My Girl by the Temptations. And Dean comes up to me and says, what the hell did you say to him? I said, Dean said, if you don't play My Girl by the Temptations, you're fired. But that's how that all evolved. There was never we didn't want people to think that we were changing. And we never did. And damn, that was a great policy. And as a result, we had mom and dad listening at the same time. We had brother and sister listening too. And we were getting, 14s, 15s. Today you're lucky to get 2, 3, 4 share. And we were just pulling. And that was the reason why, to this day, as recently as 2 days, at the Flyers game. I remember you from WIP. The kid's 20 years old. He was a baby, 25. I said, no, you weren't listening. No, Mom, Dad is, and I had the radio on. And as a result, there's 2 generations listening.
Any questions out there? Let's open it up to anybody who want to ask any questions about our WIP DJs. We're in the back.
How about Jack Pyle?
Well, he never worked for WIP, but that was way, way back. That was before the new WIP sound.
Hey, Bill?
Very, very quickly, though, just let me do this fast, but talk about money. Ben Gimbel worked with his brothers, Gimbel brothers. They owned WIP. They were told to sell the station. Ben Gimbel got a group of people together. A fellow named John P. Crisconi, a guy named Spatola from Spatola Wines, a guy named Bob Hope, a comedian, a fellow named Jim Leeming, who was a sportscaster, and they bought WIP from Gimbel's for $1.5 million. Several years later, John Kluge was starting Metromedia. He bought WIP for $3 million. Instead of paying them in cash, he paid them in Metromedia stock. Metromedia stock for $3 million worth was running around $2 a share. Metromedia split 5 times, and when it closed, it was selling for $725 a share. After they had split 5 different times. So a lot of those guys, in fact, John P. Crisconi had more stock than any other person in America who wasn't on the board of directors. So they put him on the board of directors because he was the car dealership in South Philadelphia.
Tony, any of these smart DJ guys up here that invested in
Turn your microphone on.
Not one of us bought 1 share of stock, so how dumb can we be?
Hey, Tom, your mic technique still sucks.
Bada boom.
But to show you how...
Tell them about your zoo program.
That was on a whole other station, buddy. Come on, that's like WSCV, a.k.a. KYW. Nah.
But let me tell you something about talking about money and IP and making money about how they spend it. In 67 or 68, I can't remember, every year though, every advertiser on the air was taken for one night to a big gala. It was the hottest ticket. You couldn't get it unless you were invited. The double-decker buses would come through Philadelphia, pick up everybody, and take them either to the Downtown Inn. But the one I'm thinking about is the Cherry Hill Inn.
Yes.
Everybody who was anybody in the community was there in advertising. IP, the bar was open all night. Dinner was exquisite. And at the end of the dinner, Dick Carr, I believe, got up and there was a stage with the curtain closed. And he said, we thank you all for being here. We thank you for being sponsors. And now for your entertainment, the Count Basie Band and Tony Bennett. And it opened up, and that was the night. That's how WIP spent their money.
He's really stoked, because he put on great parties too in years after that.
And it was John, I heard it was John Kluge who called Tony Bennett and said, be there.
Well, just to give you a little insight into John Kluge, he owned WNEW, where I also worked, as did Bob. And William B. Williams, who's a legendary broadcaster in radio, was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. He was non-confrontational, but he never did anything that he could get away with not doing. And the reason he did that was he'd call Kluge on the phone and say, Dean's giving me a lot of crap about this. So what am I going to do? The general manager says, John Kluge doesn't like what you're doing to William B. So I'd have to back off. But this was typical of that radio group. They were all intimately involved. John Kluge used to come to Philadelphia to visit in person with the management of WIP because it was his favorite radio stations of everything he owned, radio and non-broadcast. And John was quite a man.
And Kluge would introduce us at the Crisconi party that they had at the White Marsh, where Crisconi had a house next to the White Marsh Country Club. And his first wife was his age, rather stout lady. That was his first wife. His second wife was a blonde who was his secretary, about 35 years old. And his third wife was about 27 years old.
Oh, she was a hell of a guy.
Yeah.
And I saw him not too long after he divested of all the Metromedia holdings because he thought pagers might be a good idea. Was it ever?
Cell phones, yeah.
And he had cell phones and pagers, so he sold everything. I mean, liquidated, right? Everything, Metro Media, and it was a pretty large holding at that time. And not too long after that, he was #1 on the Fortune 500. When I ran into him at Madison Square Garden, right after the Fortune 500 issue came out with him on the top, I said, "How are you, John? Good to see you again." As Dean said, "Our favorite station, your favorite station was WIP, right? Oh, always. Well, aren't you glad we're able to put you where you are today?" And he said, "You're right. You're absolutely. I don't think there was a bigger grossing station in the country than WIP was."
Absolutely.
They had $100 bills for every memo I put out.
And they're all.
Matt said something I have to refer to. He mentioned
Be one
memos.
rich dude.
I was the king of memos. Because the one thing that I found that we don't do in broadcasting, which is a communications business, is we don't communicate well. So I figured I can't talk to every guy every day, and then I have to listen to their retort. I don't want them to do that. I want them to know what they got to do, and just go ahead and do it. And I want to have proof that I told them. So I put out mega memos. This
I used to save every memo. This
every memo.
You got a stack.
I'm as tall as I am.
See what
One
makes
day,
it renew.
the fire marshal comes around inspecting the building. Comes to the jock's room, and he looks in there and spots the one desk. The stack must have been 3 feet high. Memo City, man. And he goes, "What the hell's that back there?" Dean says, "Well, it's one of our guys. He keeps my memos." He says, "It's a fire hazard. Clear it off or you're shut down."
And his favorite remark was keep it light, tight, and bright. All right, thank you. Any last questions? We're going to, in the back.
Wasn't Brookshire and Cunningham part of it, the WIP a few years ago?
At one time.
Yeah.
This is after IP was sold for $6 million to the Snyder family. Brookshire had a small interest, indicating about 5% or something like that. WPEN could have bought WIP for $6 million. They bought, 25 years later, FLN for $42 million. They could have bought WIP for
They're still trying to catch up.
Yeah.
Cal.
You want to tell the legendary story about Judy Collins and how that became...
I have that treasured picture of Judith Collins sitting between you and me. One of my few moments of class.
Right there.
There's it.
It's on.
It's on.
You can tell, you know why I work the shift I did. I never know how to handle one of these things. And I used to follow Tom Lemaine, and we did everything standing up. If you could call me standing up. And when I would follow
Everything
Tom,
standing up, man.
Huh?
You did everything standing up.
Everything.
That's for you.
We all did.
Yes, I have a remarkable family. But I followed Tom on the air one night, and people would phone and say, "Boy, you sound awful far away. You sick? You tired?" And I looked up, the microphone was on the ceiling. So I pulled the mic down, a lot of crushing noises I did, and then resumed my bit. I think that one of my classiest encounters was when, and Cal can double check me on this, I got a phone call from, who was the record promoter with you at that time?
Harry Finford.
And the guy goes, we had played Judy Collins, Send in the Clouds. And it was a nice, it was classic. But we didn't play it frequently enough. And Cal, having the musical radar that he does, phoned and said, we get a little more action on this. It could be a hit. And the courts would call this an ex parte contact. But this guy was such a good buddy. And Cal's the kind of a guy where if you toss him a ton of steel wool, he'll knit you a Volkswagen.
Hey, Bones, I'm going to close it down and remind everybody that standing in the door is our speaker for January, Mark Howard, who will be here speaking with us in January. One of our members. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.